Welcome to class on the 16th of April, and our topic today is American political thought and American identity. It asks the question, what does it mean to be an American? That may seem straightforward, but that's a somewhat complex question. More complex than, say, asking a Japanese, what does it mean to be Japanese, or a German. That's because the Japanese and the Germans, for much of their history, they were kind of closed society. They didn't have masses of immigration. That might be changing in Germany now, so we can see if that'll change. And so, if you ask a Japanese, what does it mean to be Japanese? Well, you're born in Japan to Japanese parents. That's who the Japanese are, because they didn't have immigration. It's more complex in the United States because we've had so much immigration. And we've had waves of immigration that have changed the conception Americans have of what it means to be an American. Now, I'm going to use the analysis of immigration by Michael Lind. I've already talked about his work in here. He wrote a book, The Next American Nation, and he really analyzes and he puts American immigration down into a kind of chart that helps understand it. So I'm going to present to you the chart that Michael Lind has put together about immigration in the United States. What happened is, according to Mr. Lind, he analyzes immigration in the United States into waves. And we've had three big waves of immigration. And each wave is wave one, wave two, wave three. And then he gives information about those waves that really helps kind of analyze and synopsize what those waves were like. So, for instance, the first wave of immigration to the United States. Now, he's not counting people that were brought here in chains, African Americans, because it would only be later down here at the wave three time that truly African Americans get to be full citizens with all the rights of citizens. Up here at the top in wave one, he gives the dates. That took place between 1500 and 1800. And where did the people come from in that first wave? Well, they came from northwestern Europe, English, Irish, German, and Scandinavia, and they settled along the east coast of the United States. That was 360 years of this immigration, from 1500, just after Columbus's voyage, up until 1860, the Civil War. And these people that came here in this big wave along the East Coast, they established what he calls a national community that was Anglo-American. That is, at this time, for these people to be considered American, you came from Northwest Europe. That's what America was in this period. The civic religion of this first wave America that was built up was Protestant Christianity. So you didn't have many Catholics, and we weren't counting Jews or other major religions. This was the Protestant form of Christianity, which dominated the American of this first wave. And the political creed, that is, what were they trying to set up in terms of politics here in the United States? Lynn describes it as a federal republic. We saw that the founding generations did not think that they were setting up a democracy. They thought, first of all, they were setting up federalism, which means you're going to have state governments and you're going to have a federal government, right? And it's a republic, not a democracy. Was it Benjamin Franklin that gave his disdainful view of democracy when he said that democracy is two wolves and a lamb voting on what's for dinner? Not thinking much of democracy. So that was that first wave that established the Constitution and the first republic here in the United States. Now, there was a pause of just a few years here during the Civil War, and then after the Civil War, we have what Linda's calling the second wave of immigration. Going from 1865 up until 1964, though the period where we had a lot of immigration went from 1865 up until World War I, 1914. And then immigration was real slow after that. There was a period of assimilation from 1914 up to 1964. Now, this second wave came from different places in the world than the first wave. The second wave consisted largely of Italians, Jews, Poles, and Slavs, and it purposely excluded Asians. we have Asian exclusion laws in the United States to limit the number of Asians. We'll talk about that in a second. So these people came from different places. And what happened is they became assimilated into the United States, and they changed the character of what it means to be an American, because these people were different from the first wave people. The national community was transformed. The earlier national community was Anglo-American, right? This second wave, Lynn calls it European, Euro-America. So it's Euro-America set up by this second wave. That means to be an American, you were a white person. And not only from Northwest Europe, but from all over Europe, because now we have people from Eastern and Southern Europe coming into the United States. The civic religion that was set up by this second wave, added to the first wave, was the term Judeo-Christian. That is, now we have the term Christian, which means not only Protestant Christians, but Catholic Christians. Protestants and Catholics had their fights in Europe for centuries. Here, we're going to try to live in peace. And also, Jews are accepted as being part of America. Hence, we coined this term Judeo-Christian to talk about the civic religion during this period from 1865 to 1964. Now, the political creed also was changed by that second wave. The first wave, we set up a federal republic. In the second wave, now we use the term democracy. America sets up a federal democracy. The federal part means that state governments are still real powerful and important in the United States, but we accept the term democracy at this period. From about the time of Andrew Jackson, just before this period, we begin to use the word democracy to describe ourselves in America. So that you could see that big change the second wave brought to the United States. Finally, Lynn wants to talk about the wave we're in right now, the third wave. It's the biggest wave of all, according to Lynn. The people in the third wave are going to come from different parts of the world. They're going to come from Latin America and Asia. And Lynn has an interesting theory about why certain places of the world fuel these different waves. And he thinks what happens is people want to immigrate from a country when it's under turmoil and change. And the big turmoil through all this period was industrialization. About in 1800, things began to change. A little before that in England and Britain. And industrialization brings such social dislocation that people are willing to pull up their stakes and go to a different place. And that different place that they heard they could go was America. So the Industrial Revolution began in Northwest Europe, in places like Britain and Scandinavia and Germany. And so people were disoriented and came to America during that disruption of industrialization. In this second wave, the idea behind Lynn's thesis is that industrialization moved away from Northwest Europe and moved to other parts of Europe. It moved to Mediterranean Europe and Eastern Europe. That dislocation meant that many people were willing to immigrate from Italy, Eastern Europe, and many Jews and Catholics from Eastern Europe came to the United States because of that disruption. Then finally we get to this third wave now. The Industrial Revolution moved into Latin America and Asia during the third wave period. Many of those people felt that dislocation. Many of them thought, I'll immigrate to the United States and make a life there. So Latin Americans and Asians make up the bulk of this third wave, and we're still in that third wave now. According to Lynn, this is the biggest wave of all that we're in. So immigration isn't done making changes in America. Now that third wave, the years he puts is from 1965 to the present. In 1965, we changed the immigration laws in the United States. And what happened is we began to get in the late 60s small numbers of immigrants that picked up in the 70s, then became pretty rapid in the 80s and 90s. This wave of people coming from different parts of the world, according to Lynn, set up a different national community. We moved away from a white America. And this 1964 is the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which marks the end of that second wave in Euro-America. Now we have the Civil Rights Movement, and we have the acceptance on the part of elites that we're going to dismantle the racial caste system. And you don't have to be white to be an American. So what has been set up in the national community under this third wave is what Lynn calls, we now don't have one nation, we have 5 separate nations defined by race: whites, blacks, Hispanic, Asian Americans, and Amerindians. And I believe, I haven't looked at the census this year, but the census was classifying people according to these 5 different ideas of race and the different communities they form. It's from Lind, I read, and I haven't tried to verify it, that in fact, the way we take the census and the way elites look at race in the United States has changed over the centuries. That in the 19th century, you were thought of as being white, black, or Irish. Now we've changed our conception of race from that point because we have different immigration and we have a different experience. So we have these 5 separate nations in the national community that replaced Euro-America, according to Lynn. And now the civic religion under this third wave is a secular philosophy of authenticity and therapy. Is he right about this? Every society has people we call the clerisy, groups and people that say, what is acceptable in sex and marriage? What is society like? They form our values. Now, it used to be, according to Lynn, that in fact the traditional religions, Judaism and Christianity, had set up that basis for those rules. But now notice, the clergy from these major world religions have dropped out as the important part of the clerisy. Lind is arguing that in fact we have a different clerisy in the United States. It's the intellectuals, the therapists, the social scientists, the educated classes that make up a kind of clerisy and have kind of muscled out priests, ministers, and rabbis in setting the pace for what is acceptable in America. And so that's why he calls it a secular philosophy. And he says now we have the undergirding philosophy is not Christianity or Judaism. It's this view of authenticity and therapy. That in fact, what you want to be in the world is authentic, and you try to be your best self. And when you have various difficulties, you don't really go to a priest or a rabbi or a minister, but you go to a therapist. Thus, if we had on a show like Oprah's show or Phil Donahue's before that, or Dr. Phil now, when people go on and have problems, these therapists are the ones that massage them and help them out, not priests and not rabbis and not ministers. Lynn is putting that as our new kind of civic religion in this changed America. Now, finally, the political creed under wave 3 that we're in. We're no longer a federal democracy. We have centralized multicultural democracy. So we haven't given up on democracy. The mass of people and what they want is what we should do. But notice he substitutes for federalized, centralized. That is, that the federal government has become so powerful that it's pushing state government and local government out, and the federal government has become more than supreme, dominant. Now, we may see an argument along these lines. I see that President Trump thinks he's the person who's going to decide when we're done with the shut-in and we open up the economy. Well, the governors have something to say about that, and there's a fight brewing about it right now. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But it's Lynn's idea that government has become centralized. And the big gorilla in government now is the federal government, and it gets its way over these state governments. The multicultural part brings in that America's not just a white America anymore. It has these different 5 groups that are, this is what multicultural is supposed to say, and these 5 groups sit at the table, and among the 5 groups, we decide what happens, that we don't have the dominant of one racial group over another. And then he still keeps the democracy here. The democracy is still the creed that we live by. Now, another interesting point, if you accept these waves of immigration, making America what it is in its identity, is that it's interesting to look at, and Lynn spends a good bit of time about this. It's interesting looking at when people were already here and a wave came, how did the Americans that were here react to it? How did they deal with it? So we have wave 1 people here in America from 1500 to 1860. And then in the late 19th century and early 20th century, we have these wave 2 people coming from different places, from Eastern Europe and Southern Europe. And how did they react to this? Well, it depends on who you ask, Lynn says. the elites that were in America thought this immigration was just great. Elites like Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller, immigrants came. They came from different parts of America. They came and wanted to work. They didn't make trouble. They really didn't try to push Marxism, which was getting more and more popular in Europe. They came to work hard in Carnegie steel mills, on the railroads. And so the elites thought, this is great. We have this big army of people working hard, building a great America. So the elites accepted this wave to immigrants. The problem, according to Lynn, was with mass Americans. Mass Americans didn't have that positive view towards the immigrants that were coming here. First of all, they looked at them and saw that they were shabby and poor. They disliked that. And they came and joined the working class, and they thought that they were moving the working class down. Uh, there was fear that these immigrants were taking their jobs. They were coming and working in Andrew Carnegie's steel mill for dirt wages under horrible conditions and weren't squabbling at all. And in fact, if you didn't want to work under those conditions and you were in America for several generations, well, tough luck. Your job was going to be taken by an American, by an immigrant. And so there was conflict between working class downscale Americans who had already been here. Also, there was this idea, even among elite Americans, that the immigrants were kind of lower stock and that they would degenerate the racial stock in America. Darwin's ideas are now well accepted among intellectuals in America. And there was a movement of eugenetics that, in fact, you wanted to increase the gene pool, and that it was thought that immigrants were decreasing the gene pool in the United States. And so it wasn't good for the country. There was that opposition to immigration. And there was also this fear that these immigrants are taking over. They're coming into the big cities and they're joining the Democratic Party and the machines, and they're becoming a dominant force in American politics. And that is that this fear on the part of Americans that have been here now, that they're kind of taking over and they're tipping the balance of power in American politics. So that was negative. Uh, Wave one immigrants set up an important clearinghouse for immigrants coming into the United States at Ellis Island. I don't know if you've ever been to Ellis Island in New York Harbor. It was where many immigrants came through. My grandparents, my wife's grandparents came to the United States. Uh, Second decade of the 20th century through Ellis Island. It's now a museum. You can go and see it. It's a museum to immigration in the United States. It's an interesting place to go. I would go there. If you can't go there, you can watch the scenes depicting in the movie The Godfather, when Don Vito Corleone comes from Italy, and how immigrants were treated, how he was put into quarantine, what happened there, how his name was even changed to Corleone because people couldn't read his Italian documents that he brought with him. They've done a really good job at recreating Ellis Island and what it must have been like in that movie. And also, it should be mentioned that opposition to the Wave 2 immigrants had spurned a party called the Know Nothing Party that was against this immigration, that tried to stop this immigration here in the United States. It's similar to the anti-immigration sentiments I think you get with Mr. Trump and with his coalition. Now, what was the theoretical underpinning that Americans have as to how we should make Americans out of these Wave 2 immigrants? And the theory that was used was called the melting pot. The idea was this, that Americans come from different places, they give up their identities, and they melt into an American identity. And we all come together doing that. Now, in order to join the melting pot and become Americans, for the Wave 2 immigrants, they had to accept certain things. They had to accept the principles of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. None of this coming here and trying to impose Confucianism on people. You had to give up that sort of thing. Give up what was going on, like fascism, say, in Italy. And you had to accept the principles of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. It was also expected of you that you would accept the basic Judeo-Christian ideas on sex and marriage. So you had to accept that sex took place in marriage, and a marriage is between one man and one woman. So monogamy was the only acceptable thing. Now, we might take some monogamy for granted, but I was watching a documentary by an expert on marriage who looked at many different societies and marital structure. Monogamy is not the majority. Polygamy is the majority. There's another family structure, polyandry, in which one woman can have many husbands and they make up a family, but that's very few in number. Polygamy is most common, where a man can have multiple wives. And if you're coming to America, you had to accept monogamy. This was a problem for Mormons. Mormons with this unusual religion had been fighting on the East Coast. They went and settled in Ohio. They fought with people in Ohio. They moved to Illinois. There was trouble in Illinois. They finally moved out to Utah, where they made their home. Utah became a state, and part of the deal was you have to give up the polygamy that was found in early Mormonism in order to join the Union. That is, there was this imposition of this Judeo-Christian values on the second wave immigrants in the United States by the first wave immigrants. Another thing you had to accept if you were a wave two immigrant coming into the United States is you had to accept English as the common language. So it was noted that wave two immigrants came in, they lived in their own territory, their own ghettos. My grandparents lived in an Italian section. My wife's grandparents in a Polish section. They spoke a lot of Polish and a lot of Italians in those neighborhoods, even had their own newspapers. But the public schools were going to teach English. Their kids were going to learn English. English would be the common language. And so there was this kind of assimilation and melting Americans into American immigrants into American society. And the schools had an important part to play. Uh, Americans wondered, did the wave two immigrants really get melted into the United States? Did they give up their allegiance to that other nation they came from and now become full-fledged Americans? I know military leaders in the United States in World War II wondered about that. General Patton wondered about that. He's going into Europe with a big army of Americans. Uh, the role for his soldiers is going to be to kill Germans and Italians. There's a lot of German people, Americans of German and Italian descent. Will they really do their duty and do that? Do they think of themselves as Americans or as Italians or Germans? He soon found out that no, that allegiance was gone to the old country on the part of Americans that had been just one generation removed from immigration, and that they were Americans through and through. Another point from about the wave two immigrants that's important is they came and they found a home in the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party's been the home for immigrants. So the Democratic Party dominates big cities where immigrants lived, like Chicago and New York, and the political machines. Immigrants were an important part of that. Now, we're in this third wave now, this largest wave, according to Michael Lind. It began really in the mid 60s, a little reaction to it, but the numbers have increased, and the wave three immigrants have been concentrated in a small number of states. California, Texas, and Florida have many of the wave three immigrants, and you can see the changes in those places because of that. There's a different treatment of wave three immigrants. So, for instance, Hispanic wave three immigrants, America's elites go out of their way to protect them from any kind of prejudice against them. Though my Asian friends say, wait a minute, we think American elites want to limit our opportunities in the universities, especially in the most elite universities. That lawsuit against Harvard that's moving through the court system has that idea that Asian immigrants have shown themselves to be very good at education and to work on the education of their children. They become very competitive and they feel they're being held back from what they could achieve because of it. That'll be an issue that'll continue for some time on. Now we have issues because of wave three immigration. One is it's kind of moved off to the wayside, but we had the issue of bilingual education. Uh, Immigrants come, their children don't know the language, they're at a disadvantage. Should they be taught in their original tongue? And so we kind of moved away from that, and the idea has become generally accepted that if you're going to make your way in America, you got to learn English. You got to be good at English. So bilingual education has moved off to the side. Multiculturalism in school is an issue. For instance, uh, Afrocentric education in areas where you have schools with large numbers of African Americans. Why should they look from the standpoint of white Americans and how America was formed? Shouldn't they look at their black heritage? And that becomes important part. Now, the wave three immigrants and the elites have also attacked the idea of the melting pot, that you come here and you melt. Instead, the metaphor that I see used is that America's a salad bowl, that you come here from a different place and you don't have to melt and give up your identity. You become American, but like a salad, you remain unique. The lettuce doesn't merge with the tomatoes in your salad and the cheese. So salad bowl is what America's elites kind of use, and you can keep your multicultural status. You don't have to meet to move right into America. The final big issue, I think, with this wave three immigrants is that, well, we have immigration laws. There's a way you come into the United States. You come in for a certain period of time, you get a green card, you have a certain status, and you go through a period of becoming Americanized. Well, undocumented workers, illegal immigrants that just move into the United States, come with a non-immigrant visa, and stay has become a big issue. Uh, this was an issue in the 1980s. We had 3 million undocumented workers slash illegal immigrants. Use whatever word you want. I hear at the University of Michigan you're not allowed to use the word illegal immigrants. Political correctness is alive and well in Ann Arbor, Michigan. So if you prefer undocumented worker, use that term. But what to do in the 1980s about 3 million people like that? There was a bill pushed by Simpson and Mazzola, signed by President Reagan. And here was the deal. Okay, we have 3 million people here. We make the sign of the cross and we give them amnesty and make them American citizens. But the federal government from now on is going to uphold the immigration laws, and you can only come here legally. So this is how we kind of control our borders through the law. And shouldn't it be the case that elites in government, when they have a policy, whether they like it or not, they should follow the law? And so this is the idea that you should follow the law. Now we have, hard to estimate, I'm seeing estimates between 12 and 15 million people, just like in the 1980s, who are undocumented workers, illegal immigrants. What to do about them is a big issue that brews up from time to time. It's something that's going to probably have to be have to be resolved over the next decade or so. And I think it will be up to your generation to resolve that. And will we continue to have large numbers of immigration by the millions? And don't Americans have a right to say, wait a minute, enough might be enough. We might not want to be crowded. That's something for your generation to decide. Now, I'm going to, well, if you're seeing this thing now, it's already up on YouTube. And sorry if it's late because YouTube uploading is really slow today. It took me 2 hours to put up a video earlier in the morning. What you should do now is go to the discussion board on Blackboard and leave your comments and questions, things of that nature. What'll happen on Tuesday is I'll send you another video, and this one will be on American political thought on what Americans think America's role is in the world. And again, that's something that's changed over time. We'll do that on Tuesday. Then next Thursday, the 23rd, that's our last day of classes. I'll send you a video that kind of summarizes and looks at the whole course and taking a macro look at it. And then I'll send you the final exam. The plan now is to send you a take-home final exam, give you a week to work on it. Now, I'll do that on Thursday, unless the deans send me an email saying, Doug, you can't do this. You know, the deans are in charge, and they have their hands full in trying to make all this work. So go to Blackboard, go to the discussion sessions. And next week on the 23rd, you also owe me a third critique and then your book critique. And in your book critique, you should probably synopsize your book and give a critical analysis of what it's like. Thank you.